We're having a conversation with Matthew to discuss the config pattern that is designed to help people accelerate their quoting process, especially when they don't necessarily have items in their database, but they're building complex configurations that are going to go into a customer implementation.
Yeah, and something else to say is when you don't necessarily know who the end customer would be. What we design is called a config. So we have what we call a main config, where obviously we put all the metadata about that quote, so to speak. So in this case, it's for building projects. So who's the architect, franchisee, the site where that building takes place, some other element like brand or who's the requester being who's the person asking to get a quote, but doesn't necessarily mean he's the customer. Okay. So that's the major difference between the quote in NetSuite is you put the customer in here, we put a requester. And second point is all the sub configs, which is if you want to break apart your quote into multiple quotes, because each of those underlying quotes will end up being converted to their own sales order at the end of the day. So you can define those as, if you have your main quote about something very high level, and then you want to break it down by sub level, well, that's what we call sub configs. And those sub configs have config lines, which are ultimately a line item. And the innovation in all that is those config lines, they don't need to have an item set up in your database. So you can put in their case, it's what's the MPN and the price and cost. So they can quickly send out estimate to their requester to then, if it's approved, convert to a sales order. Obviously, before converting sales order, you need to now have the customer and all the items set up. So we created some pretty good functionality to create items very quickly. So it's
so this kind of emulated the fact that they were in spreadsheets trying to do this process, which was relatively fast, but not connected to the database and the whole concept of quoting. So it was a lot of outside work. And then the idea is they got to go out and find the different suppliers of those manufactured partners, MPN, and various other kinds of things. And so a config can have a subconfig, so it's got a hierarchical kind of capacity because you might select just components of the solution, not the entire solution. And so it allows you to mix and match whatever you need.
Yep. Something we also put a lot of effort on is the copy functionality, because it's repeated again and again that, quoting project, it's always just a costly function for a business, right? So you want to get that done very efficiently and quickly. So we put a lot of effort in copying sub configs or configs. So creating config is fairly quick. So what the idea is, you can go create a config for a new project and just go grab multiple sub configs from old projects and just attach it to the new one very quickly.
I see.
And having a lot of synchronization between the new main and all the old sub, and get everything tied together.
Got it. And so then the idea is that for people that do this all the time, they're building blocks, the things they know, and they go grab from previous work to constitute things.
Yeah, like the same architect will usually do the same thing. So they go search by architect. They know they have that sub config, and they attach it to the new project with the same architect. So it's pretty convenient to them.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
So here's how a main config looks like. Has the name, the date at which it got requested, a due date, send date, expiry date, because there's a lot of innovation around expiry. So whenever a sub config, because that's or a main config gets expired, you want to make sure that you never convert that. So we block the conversion to a sales order, and we put a lot of effort in what we call a recalculate function that flows into every line and update to the newest cost and price to get an accurate margin and so forth. So the status is very important too, especially when it gets to expired, based on the expiry date. well, the brand, if and however you define your config, right? So some brands, some class, some types, projects, because it's also tied to the project record, the site where it takes place, and some other, metadata about who's behind this project, so franchisee and so forth. Okay, something else that is really important is price level. Okay, so the core is that you put a price level in the main config, and then any sub config that you create out of it will inherit that price level. And then every items that you add to config lines will now read the price level on the item record. If there's an item record, it will go grab that price level on the line as the selling price.
Because you mean parts of it there may be items in the database, but other parts of it may not be in the database. May not be truly in NetSuite's item database.
Yeah, so the innovation with this is that they get requests to quote the same project sometimes 3 or 4 times by different type of custom requesters, so to speak, and each of them have their own price level, so they can grab the same main config, the same exact one with everything built, copy the main config under another price level, and then everything will sync up under that new price level on all the lines. So now in like a minute, you get 2 different quotes, 2 different prices with all the same stuff. So it's pretty convenient and fast. Some economics, obviously. This one has no sub config. So what I can do now is I can go and copy a sub config. Okay, so if you want to make it fast,
it has, because this one has nothing right now.
It has nothing. Yep.
Down below, there's no lines. What's this thing over there with these RSM rules?
Well, we added RSM to this, so there's a whole very complex state machine running against the config that says, okay, in order to move to the complete status or to other status, these needs to pass and so forth. I think there are 7 or 8.
Got it.
Even more. 12,
got it. Okay, so all the things to ensure that everything's ready to go when it tries to move to the right process as it moves down and this thing's living. Okay, very good.
Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure you never convert the sub config if it's missing something.
Yes.
Right? So that's a sub config. So sub configs, they have type, whatever you want to call it, and they look exactly the same. So it's the same record, but just the form is a little different.
So are we in a sub config right now?
Yeah, that's a sub config. Yep.
How can you tell?
By the form, because it's the same record. So here you have the primary information from the main config, and here you see just config, versus on the other one you have all the primary information, which if I were in edit, I couldn't touch anything because it's sourced. Okay, it's sourced from the main.
Got it. I see it.
Aside from memos, obviously.
Yeah.
And that got added after. And here it's sub config instead of config. So sub config is now what I want to tie with, the type, like I was saying. Requester, because the same main could have multiple requesters, and like large companies, maybe they have requester A for a certain type and then requester B for another type. And all of the customer and sales order data, that because at the end of the day, the sub config is the record that converts to a sales order.
Got it.
Okay. Yes, and dates and so forth. I'll talk about the competing sub config because that's really a nice feature. But now what I want to show is this one has 3 lines. Okay, 3 line items. Each of them are tied to an item that exists in the database. Okay, so if you look at this, quantity, units, manufacturer, nothing new. Who's the preferred vendor for that manufacturer? Could have multiple vendors. MPN, because their business is tied only to MPNs. The location where this is sourced. So in this case, these are all dropship. Description. Price level that I was talking about. So that's sync by the main config to the sub config that we don't see in here, but we see in the title, so to speak. And each line inherit that price level and the rate that is sourced under that price level because my item exists. Again, if it didn't exist, that will be blank. So now the idea is you want to grab this that is old and I want to copy it to the new main, okay? And I want to show one thing. Config lines, I want to show this item. Okay, now I just want to kick the copy process. So I do action make copy. And now what we do is we ask, okay, we make you tell me, okay, against which main config do I want to
I
attach
see. So
this
you're
new
attaching this into it. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So, and we kind of wipe out everything else because it will be synced with the new parent.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay, so here I want to just grab the ID because that's easier like this. Just do this. Boom, I have it here. And I only hit save. So I just want to say, okay, what's the new parent? Let me take care of the rest. Okay, so that's syncing. Now let's just wait. Okay, now let me just grab the one that I copied from. Okay, that's the old one, because what I want to show here is this. Okay, so the old one, if you look in the lines, okay, it has this item, the third one. It was 956, the price for that price level, and the cost was 717 for this vendor. Okay, so if we look at this record, what we see is, I already opened it. What we see is that in the notes, we could see that I changed it. Okay, so I changed the selling price to now be 1,000, and the cost is now, what is it? 800. So this one is old.
So you
And now-
updated. So you were able to update the items, even though you're in this config, this custom config area, because you already had a cross reference. You could update elements of the item that was already existing.
Well, yeah, I updated the element to that item, but what I want to show is, because when you copy a sub config, you copy really the items and everything, but you don't want to copy pricing again, because the idea is it could be a very old
I see. Yes.
sub configs that got updated.
So we got to
So
start
whenever
over.
it gets copied, I want to get the latest.
So you're getting the latest from the item database.
from the item database, exactly.
Yeah, because respecting the price level. I understand.
Exactly.
I was
So
kind of
now-
curious how you were getting that price information, but now it makes sense.
Yeah. So now if I go to my config lines that got just copied, and so see now same 3 lines, but now see line number 3,
It's different price. Yep.
it's now 1,800 because that's the latest. Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
The idea is whatever pricing you put on a config has to be, what's the right word, like respected, or even though prices change, as long as my config is not expired, I have to deem or respect that, honor, that's the right word, I have to honor that price, right? When it's expired, that's when I recalculate pricing to get the latest. But as long as it's not expired, even though prices increase, I have to accept the price that I've put on my config. So now that's the new one that I copied. All of the header information got synced from the parent. I iterated all the lines from the copy subconfig.
And if we went over to the main config, because we're in the subconfig right now, would you see the subconfig elements in the main
let me
one?
just refresh this. Now I see it right here. Okay. I see the economics are not triggered. So let me just, okay, something I could do now. I got to create a project, just click a button.
So I didn't notice because you're on the main config now, right? So
Yeah,
did it show, or
I'm on the main config. It doesn't show in the sub because everything that is in the primary information has to be put in the main to then be synced down. So there's a lot of effort that has been put in the synchronization process. What is being synced down, which is most of the main config data is synced down to the subs, but pricing on the subs are synced up to update the economics of the main config. Because that's really what should be touched on the sub is prices and items and quantity and so forth. So that one's the only thing that syncs up. Everything else is synced down. Now my project got triggered. So if I were to go back to my sub config and refresh it, now I have my project. Make sense?
But you spend more time in the subconfig than the main config. The main config is designed to hold the whole thing together, but you're typically working in subconfigs heavily, correct?
Yeah.
Because that's where the product orientation is, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay,
that's where the items are. Okay, now about items. If I were to add something, let's say I want to add the 2 of, let's pick the one, something that's just above. So here, who's my manufacturer? I assign who the preferred vendor is for the manufacturer. In this use case, the manufacturer is also the vendor. And if I were to just grab the MPN, I put it, there's a lookup in the entire database, and boom, now it finds this item. if I were to just do something else, tab out, doesn't find anything. So
That's
I
why
don't
we
have any
don't
lookup
need we don't need the references to
to
NetSuite's
an item
item
record.
tables. Yep.
Exactly. So now I can play with prices like this, whatever I want. And that could be quick, okay? The good thing is, if I were to create an item where my preferred vendor is LSI Industries and my MPN is this, on create, we have a user event that go and find every sub configs where I have this MPN and I push my lookup.
I see. So you're trying to create the item. It goes
Yep.
back and heals with the old ones.
It yields the sub config.
But really the innovation here is that's kind of deep in the process. Really the innovation here is, imagine we never had any item lookups. At some point you commit and it generates everything needed to create NetSuite items.
Yep, good point. So here,
that's kind of
in
the
this
main
use
flow,
case,
right?
Yeah, well,
fresh.
depends which way you do it, okay? But as soon as we find a line that has no lookup, there's a button that shows at the top called item creation.
Okay.
So when I click this, it's all app setting driven. Okay, so we can set up, income account, expense account, every account you want, or any kind of hard coded value to the item record. But what happened here is you can easily, by just clicking save.
Item type you didn't need to see indicate.
Not necessarily. I could have put in an item type if you want, but it's not, not really. It's just that the idea is just to show that I create an item record.
Got it. So this would handle in bulk all the items that needed to get created, and if they needed to tweak any of the options, they could.
It could, yeah, before committing, yes. So in this case, I only had one line, so only one line showed up. But if I had 10 lines that were not found in the database, I would have 10 lines, and I could in bulk create all 10. That's the reason why we did it that way. Also, is you don't want to clog your database with millions and millions of items that you're not even intending to purchase or to sell.
So under this model, the salespeople make some sort of a discretion when they need to create items, but they can't really go to a sales order until the items have been created.
Correct.
And so does the RSM rules protect that?
It's protected by RSM. RSM will tell you that before converting, you cannot until all items are there, but there's also a user event that restricts you, that hide the button from converting.
So you're controlling the experience, right? But they would not go to items until they know they're going to get a commitment.
Yep. And it's the same with and same as for customer.
It'll create customers too?
No, I mean, you cannot convert as long as you don't have a customer. So in this case, I have no customer.
Right.
So I just have a requester.
Right.
Exactly. But I haven't received the PO yet. So I don't even know who's going to pay me.
Got it. So, you're going to get a commitment, so you could create the items, but you're still waiting to go to a sales order because you're waiting to get the rest of the information.
Yep.
Print detailed estimate or summary.
Yeah,
estimate?
that's where I was going. Yeah. Okay. So now again, there are two versions on the sub, two versions on the main. One is detailed, the other one is summary. Okay. So do you want to show the line pricing, or don't you want to show the line pricing? Okay. So if I'm on a sub config, which is this, I have a quote. This is the summary one where I do not expose the line pricing. I put, it's not expired, no expiry date just yet, but I would have the expiry date here, the line items and so forth, subtotals, if freight is included or not, and notes about this sub config. If I want to show the detailed one, well, I have it real quick right here. Same exact thing with unit pricing and extended pricing.
Nice.
Okay.
Very nice.
Now,
and these are not NetSuite's estimate records.
These are not. These are definitely not. No. Okay, now what I want to show is more than one sub config. Okay, that one. I have two sub configs. So what I can do is I can either send an estimate for each of those, because maybe requester A wants to get its own quote, requester B wants its own quote, that's fine. But maybe you want to send a summary of all. So on the main config, you have the same option. You can print the detail, or you can print the summary of everything underneath. Okay,
got it. So this is all packaging because you got different parties looking at different parts of this.
Yeah, and it's look quite the same, but we differentiate. Okay, this is sub config. That's the main config. That's my sub config, which is building lighting. And here I have another well, subtotals for that sub.
And it's
then my
categorical.
it's categorical, yeah. And then
Each
second
one of those
sub,
is subconfigs, the site lighting, and the other one's the subconfig.
yeah, site lighting is a subconfig and building lighting is another subconfig. So if you look here,
I
we have
see these.
building lighting
Got it.
and site lighting. So I show both.
Very powerful.
And same as with the detail, right? It's
Right.
all here. Pretty fast. I said you could copy a main config and have the same exact main config with all the same subconfigs and config lines for two different price level, okay? Because same project, you got asked to code it twice, okay? Now, if I were to convert, because they are the same, right? If I were to convert a building lighting on main config A, we have the process to go find if there's any other building lighting under that project. And if I do have a building lighting under that same project for another main config, we go in that subconfig and we cancel it, because the idea is you cannot win the same job twice. So as soon as I win this one for this,
you go
price,
expire it, the other ones?
I go mark it omitted.
Omitted.
Omitted, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is because there's lots of different conversations happening, and finally somebody makes a commitment, so those old things have to go away.
Yeah, exactly, because you'll
So
never
those-
win it.
Yeah, never win it. Right,
So
because there's
you
one
also,
over here.
yeah, exactly. And we have the status. So the state machine is pretty evolved, but you can say exactly, is it partially converted and closed, meaning, I converted maybe one out of the two and it's finished because the other project, the competing project, as I call it, got also, the other one got converted. So they kind of fight against one another and we heal the database. So you don't end up with thousands of estimates that remain open for no reason.
I see. This was pretty powerful. It's pretty sophisticated. Congratulations. It's probably the most innovative quoting we've seen. And so I'm pleased. Thank you, Matthew.